God, by definition, is a novelty generator. There's not 2 grains of sand on this planet that are identical. There's no 2 flowers that are identical, no 2 people. There's not even 2 bookshelves that are identical. There's not even 2 atoms that are identical. There's nothing that's identical. The closer you scrutinize, the more you realize there's nothing that's the same.
How do you help others or help yourself when it comes to being able to create freedom both from an external source in life for having that peace and harmony?
Well, you know, these are philosophical riddles that are very, very deep. So, you know, this all boils down at the end of the day to what a person's belief system is, right? This is all here because we actually, we work for God. Like, you are the only you there will ever be. This is, you know, if this goes back to Eros, you know, did you happen to listen to my podcast with Mark Gaffney recently?
No.
Oh, it's a very good one. But Mark Gaffney gives us the Hebrew conception of Eros. And he says, and Eros, of course, is love.
Yes.
He says, Eros always wants to penetrate and create novelty. Penetrate and create novelty. So, for example, porn addiction is not penetrating anything, and it's not creating novelty. But if we love somebody, we penetrate each other, and through that, we create novelty. Your future children, let's say.
I've had enough. I've got 4.
Okay, you got 4. But there will never be any of them either.
Yeah.
Just like there will never be another me or you.
Correct.
So you see, in your act of Eros, you penetrated your wife, and together you created novelty. That's what God's all about.
Yes.
Okay? If you, like I have created many, many courses, so I say, okay, I've got to penetrate this issue of the core because people are lost, and there's a lot of people with back pain. So what I had to do is I had to penetrate all the knowledge I could find and say, okay, if there's this many people running around confused, then there must be something missing in the anatomical or therapeutic or orthopedic or kinesiological viewpoints of the core, right? So I then went into relationship with all the knowledge I could find. I penetrated it and said, okay, where's the parts that these different philosophies or belief systems are missing, right? Physical therapists, let's say they know a lot about the core, but they don't know much about exercise. So they don't, they get you on the table and they teach you how to do a few little contractions, but how do you take an injured rugby player that's been out now for 3 months with a back injury from a stretch band and a pink dumbbell to the scrum? So I said, okay, well, there's a problem there because you're not getting the core ready. You've been doing isolation exercises, but not integration. And then you have to go through flexibility and stability. Then you got to develop strength that's specific, first general, then specific. Then you got to develop power that's specific to the sport. So you see, there's an example of where I penetrated and created novelty.
Yes.
And then you had all this stuff about the core. I could get piles of books out of here talking about the anatomy of the core, but not one of them says a damn thing about the fact that the organs actually control those muscles. So what I had to do is say, look, you guys, if you have a constipation in your colon, you're never going to have normal core function. Why? Because there's inhibitors. There's inhibitory nerve endings that when your colon stretches, it shuts your core down because your pelvic floor is part of your core. So the feeling that you have when you know you got to poop is your pelvic floor relaxing, which is reflexively connected to your transverse abdominis, your internal obliques, and your diaphragm. So the point I'm making is, with one simple example, if you've got an athlete that's constipated and they're lifting heavy weights, they're totally set up for a back injury, okay? So trying to address the core without looking at the person's diet, medical drugs, lifestyle, hydration, etc., is never going to work, okay? So I'm, as a therapist, looking at this going, Shit, I'm studying the anatomy of the autonomic nervous system, and I'm looking at all these reflex pathways, and it's completely and utterly dead clear these organs are controlling those muscles. And if these organs are threatened, they will shut down blood supply to the muscles they share a nerve supply with, which means less oxygen, less nutrition, and less waste removal, which is a problem for rehab, okay, and for athletic performance. Why? Because what's more important to your survival is the ability to bring food in, digest, metabolize, assimilate, and eliminate, because without that, your muscles won't make it anyhow. So on a hierarchy of structure, which is what the Chek totem pole shows you, is a hierarchy of control systems, your organs are way higher in the control of the body than the muscles themselves and the joints themselves that make the core. They're the slaves to the organs in this sense, okay? So what did I do? I penetrated and created novelty. Then I penetrated and created novelty. And so ultimately what I did, I'm just using one example, the core, is with Eros, I went into, looked at the available information, looked at all the clinical experience I had, looked at all the cases that wouldn't get better, and said, okay, I've done the right exercise, I've done the right mobilizations, but something's keeping this body inflamed, something's stopping it. So then I had to look at nutritional factors in their diet. What are they eating that's inflaming them? Then I had to look at mental emotional factors. What are their beliefs about why they got hurt, what the pain means, and how to manage it? That can be a limiting factor, right? All I'm trying to show you is that I had to penetrate and create novelty, penetrate and create novelty, penetrate and create novelty. Someone watching porn isn't penetrating anything. So they're just masturbating. And so that's what Gaffney calls pseudo-eros. It's not really love. It's not really penetration, because it's not creating something new. And God is a novelty generator. God always wants to create a new experience, because if you were God and you had everything and you were everything and you had all the time in the world, doing the same thing over and over would just bore you to death. So God, by definition, is a novelty generator. There's not 2 grains of sand on this planet that are identical. There's no 2 flowers that are identical. No 2 people. There's not even 2 bookshelves that are identical. There's not even 2 atoms that are identical. There's nothing that's identical. The closer you scrutinize, the more you realize there's nothing that's the same. If you said, okay, wait a minute, I got the world's best computerized lathe, and I'm cutting bearings to exactly the same dimensions, and I say, I got news for you. Every second that lathe runs, the blade gets duller. And therefore, there's never going to be 2 bearings the same. And there's a lot of ways you could do it. If you just got a caliper that goes from thousandths of an inch to 10 thousandths of an inch, you'd say, oh, there's a difference between these bearings, or 100 thousandths of an inch. So there's no 2 things that are alike. And whenever we start doing things repetitiously, we get bored. Right? So
with Eros wanting to penetrate and wanting to create novelty, I was then thinking about before, as I was very much enjoying going through your library, because let's say how a lot of us would believe that 2 parallel lines never meet, but in non-Euclidean geometry, 2 parallel lines meet. And
somewhere.
Yeah. Well, the North and the South Pole are examples of where parallel lines will meet.
Yeah, if you look at it that way.
Well, that was my brief understanding, because there are no squares, no straight lines in nature. And so the belief system, okay, 2 parallel lines don't meet, but hang on, if I change my belief system, 2 parallel lines can meet.
Yes.
So then I want to come back to, Paul, how can I reconstruct, change, resynthesize my belief system to then better have me show up in this world?
Have you subscribed? If not, this is the best time for you to subscribe, whether you're on the YouTube or on the podcast. Why? Because it would be a bummer if you missed out on everything that's to come, or don't subscribe if you're not actually getting much value out of this, because there is a zillion other things that you could be doing. So I'd rather you go and do that. The ball's in your court.
Well, that always goes, this is why in my system, number 1 is, what is your dream? Until we're clear what we want to create, we have no way to decide what to create. And if we don't really have a genuine interest or love for what we want to do, we'll never go through the work of making the changes, right? Because once something's programmed into your unconscious, it's like an auto program, and then it takes tremendous conscious effort to witness that programming, right? If somebody's raised with the belief that if you don't take Jesus as your savior, you're going to burn in hell, but then somebody comes along and shows you that Buddhism is a better way, then the first thing they got to do every time they study Buddha is deal with the fact that there's a voice in their head that says you shouldn't be studying Buddha because you're going to end up going to hell for that. Now, of course, that's not true, right? But there you see the disease that's created by being conscious of that idea. So what you've got to do is say, okay, now I've got to watch whenever that belief pops up in my head. I'm going to a Buddhist temple. I'm sitting there and I hear this little voice in my head saying, you're in the wrong place and you're studying the wrong material. There's, Steiner would say, the awareness soul says, is it really true? And so then you have to say, okay, well, if God is love and God is the source of everything, then God's also a Buddhist.
Yeah.
And God is also a Muslim. And God is also a Taoist. Yeah. Right? So you see what happens is once you're aware that the program belief isn't serving you and isn't really helping you love more, live more, grow more, and experience more, then you now have to take that unconscious belief that you don't even really realize is there until you sit into a Buddhist temple, and all of a sudden you're having this guilt and shame, and you go, where's that coming from?
Yes.
And you say, wow, that's my Christian programming. Is it really true? That's the awareness soul saying you need to investigate that. So then you go investigate it and you find out it's not true.
Yes.
Okay, so the point is it's going to take conscious effort. You're going to have to engage that thought every time it comes up. You're going to have to say to that voice inside of you that keeps shaming you, thank you for making me aware that I have a belief that no longer serves me. I'm really enjoying my study of Buddhism. I'm learning and growing. I'm seeing new ways of relating. You open your heart to it and you fill yourself with the love of your study of Buddhism, which inspires new neural network connections. The more emotion there is, the faster and the stronger the new neural network. And by consciously working with that unconscious thought, which brings it up into consciousness, eventually what happens is the new neural network becomes efficient enough that I love Buddhism doesn't get competition from you're cheating on Jesus, right? This is why so few people evolve, because it takes a real level of commitment, and consciousness is very energy consumptive. Anytime you're cognitively engaged, the brain will use about 80% of the available blood sugar in your body. That's why when people leave tests in school, they're exhausted quite often, because it takes a lot of energy to run your brain. But you see, Jung went on at length, so did Joseph Campbell, and many great psychologists have. People don't want to be conscious because they don't want to do the work nor take the responsibility of having to think for themselves, because the more you actually become conscious, the more you realize it's up to you to change your life, or up to you to participate in the world, or up to you to make things better, instead of just hoping that God will do it or that Jesus will come rescue everybody, like this sort of end of days prophecy, Christ is coming, the sign of, all these are stories, and God loves a good story, right? So, the answer to the question, how do I change my life, is you have to identify what it is that you want more than the life you have right now. Yeah. Or there's not going to be enough inspiration, motivation, love, and energy to make the change, because in order to change from the pattern that any one of us has been living, you have to have enough motivation to rise above it and enough energy to do the work to reprogram yourself to perceive and believe and act out the person that you choose to be as the dream affirmative new you, right? So if you don't keep investing in that person, then the inertia, one of my quotes is, a dream has the power to overcome the inertia of life. What is life? It's a bunch of habits, right? You've got the habit of breathing, the habit of eating, the habit of shitting, the habit of pissing, the habit of digesting, the habit of sleeping. So when people live a life of repetition, but there's no eros, right? There's no penetration and novelty, then they have to drug themselves to kind of create an alternate reality so that they can get away from what they've created instead of accepting responsibility for their creations. So you see people escaping flatland by drugging themselves into another existence, which doesn't usually work very well. But if you say, wow, I've done a lot in my life, but there's something that I need that's even more fulfilling. Well, then you have to say, well, what would that be? What would really give me that sense of fulfillment? Well, I've already got 4 kids. I've done that. Money, it helps, but there's a lot of rich people that aren't very happy.
If you've enjoyed this episode and it's vibed with you, then make sure that you hit subscribe, whether you're on the YouTube or on the podcast. And importantly, if there is any guests that you want me to have on the show or specific questions or topics that you want me to be able to cover for you, simply put it into the YouTube comments or send me an Instagram DM. That way I can make sure you're getting the most out of actually being here.